Chapter 1 of Initiative Psychic Energy by Warren Hilton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Initiative Psychic Energy by Warren Hilton. Chapter 1. Mental Second Wind. Are you an unusually persevering and persistent person? Or, like most of us, do you sometimes find it difficult to stick to the job until it is done? What is your usual experience in this respect? Is it not this, that you work steadily along until all of a sudden you become conscious of a feeling of weariness, crying enough for the time being, and then you yield to the impulse to stop? Assuming that this is what generally happens, does this feeling of fatigue, this impulse to rest, mean that your mental energy is exhausted? Suppose that by a determined effort of the will you force your lagging brain to take up the thread of work. There will invariably come a new supply of energy, a second wind, enabling you to forge ahead with a freshness and vigor that is surprising after the previous lassitude. Nor is this all. The same process may be repeated a second time and a third time, each new effort of the will being followed by a renewal of energy. Many a man will tell you that he does his best work in the wee watches of the morning, after tedious hours of persevering but fruitless effort. Instead of being exhausted by its long hours of persistent endeavor, the mind seems now to rise to the acme of its power, to achieve its supreme accomplishments. Difficulties melt into thin air, profound problems find easy solution, flights of genius manifest themselves. Yet long before midnight such a one had perhaps felt himself yield to fatigue and had tied a wet towel around his head or had taken stimulants to keep himself awake. The existence of this reserve supply of energy is manifested in physical as well as mental effort. Men who work with their heads and men who work with their hands, scholars and marathon runners, must alike testify to the existence of reserve supplies of power not ordinarily drawn upon. If we do not always or habitually utilize this reserve power, it is simply because we have accustomed ourselves to yield at once to the first strong feeling of fatigue. Evidence of this same fact appears in our feelings on different days. How often does a man get up from his breakfast table after a long night's rest, when he should be feeling fresh and invigorated, and say to himself, "I don't feel like working today," and it may take him until afternoon to get his work-a-day stride, if indeed he reaches it at all. You cannot yourself be immune from the feeling on certain days that you are not your best. Somehow or other your wits seem befogged. You hesitate to undertake important interviews, your interest lags, and though crises arise in your business, you feel weighted down and unable to meet them with that shrewd discernment and decisiveness of action of which you know yourself capable. But you realize in your inmost self that if you continue to exert the will and persistently hold yourself to the business in hand, sooner or later you will warm to the work, enthusiasm will come, the clouds will be dispelled, the husks will fly. Yet you have had no rest; on the contrary, you have, by continued conscious effort, consumed more and more of your vital energy. Obviously, it was not rest that you needed. What you required was the impulse of some strong desire that should carry you over the threshold of that first inertia into the wide field of reserve energy so rarely called upon and so rich in power. Under the lashings of necessity, or the spur of love or ambition, men accomplish feats of mental and physical endurance of which they would have supposed themselves incapable. Here is what a certain lawyer says of his early struggles. When I was 23 years old, married and with a family to support, I entered the law course of a great university. Of the many students in my class, 7, including me, were making a living while studying law. By special arrangement I was relieved from attendance at lectures and simply required to pass examinations on the various subjects, and was thus enabled to retain my place as principal of a large public school. During the third and last year of my law course I was principal of a public school of 2,000 children and an alternate night school with an enrollment of 750, and I worked at the law 3 nights in the week and all day Sunday. After 8 months of this the final examinations came around. They consumed a full week, from 9 in the morning until 5 or 6 at night. I had no opportunity for review, so I rented a room near the law school to save the time going and coming, and reviewed each night the subjects of examination for the following day. I did not sleep more than 2 hours any night in that week. On Thursday, while bolting a bit of luncheon, a fishbone stuck in my throat. Fearful of losing the result of my year's effort, I returned to my work, suffering much pain, and kept at it until Saturday night, when the examinations were concluded. The next day the surgeon who removed the fishbone said there was no reason why I should have not had a bad case of gangrene. When I look back on that year's work I don't see how I stood it. I don't see how I kept myself at it, day in, day out, month after month, without rest, recreation, or relief. I am sure I could never go through it again, even if I had the courage to undertake it. I ranked second in a class of 180 in my law examinations, won the second prize for the best graduating thesis, received a complimentary vote for class oratorship, and much to my surprise was soon after offered an assistant superintendency of the public schools by the school board, who knew nothing of my studies and thought my work as a teacher worthy of promotion. It was not only the hardest year's work but the best year's work I ever did. It exemplifies my invariable experience that the more we want to do, the more we can do, and the better we can do it. The following is an extract from a letter quoted by Professor James as written by Colonel Baird Smith after the siege of Delhi in 1857, to the success of which he largely contributed. My poor wife had some reason to think that war and disease, between them, had left very little of a husband to take under nursing when she got him again. An attack of scurvy had filled my mouth with sores, shaken every joint in my body, and covered me all over with scars and livid spots, so that I was unlovely to look upon. A smart knock on the ankle joint from the splinter of a shell that burst in my face, in itself a mere bagatelle of a wound, had been of necessity neglected under the pressing and insistent calls upon me, and had grown worse and worse until the whole foot below the ankle became a black mass and seemed to threaten mortification. I insisted, however, on being allowed to use it until the place was taken, mortification or no, and though the pain was sometimes horrible, I carried my point and kept up to the last. On the day after the assault I had an unlucky fall on some bad ground, and it was an open question for a day or two whether I hadn't broken my arm at the elbow. Fortunately it turned out to be only a severe sprain, but I am still conscious of the wrench it gave me. To crown the whole pleasant catalogue, I was worn to a shadow by a constant diarrhea, and consumed as much opium as would have done credit to my father-in-law, Thomas De Quincey. However, thank God, I have a good share of tapilism in me, and come out strong under difficulties. I think I may confidently say that no man ever saw me out of heart, or ever heard a complaining word from me, even when our prospects were gloomiest. We were sadly crippled by cholera, and it was almost appalling to me to find out of 25 officers I could only muster 15 for the operations of the attack. However, it was done, and after it was done came the collapse. Don't be horrified when I tell you that for the whole of the actual siege, and in truth for some little time before, I almost lived on brandy. Appetite for food I had none, and I forced myself to eat just sufficient to sustain life, and I had an incessant craving for brandy as the strongest stimulant I could get. Strange to say, I was quite unconscious of its affecting me in the slightest degree. The excitement of the work was so great that no lesser one seemed to have any chance against it, and I certainly never found my intellect clearer or my nerves stronger in my life. Such is the profound resourcefulness and enduring power of the human mind. End of chapter 1. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Chapter 2 of Initiative Psychic Energy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Andrea Fiore. Initiative Psychic Energy by Warren Hilton. Chapter 2. Reserves of Power. Stored up energy not in use has been given a name by scientific men. They call it potential energy. In this way it is distinguished from kinetic or circulating energy, by which is meant energy that is at work. For example, a ton of coal in the bin contains a certain amount of potential energy, which is capable of being converted into kinetic energy by combustion. You have a vast amount of potential energy over and above what you actually use. You have formed the habit of giving up trying a thing as soon as you have spent the usual amount of effort on it, and this without regard to whether or not you have accomplished anything. While we all have the power of sustained mental activity, not 1 in 10,000 of us holds to the top pace. Worse still, even such mental energy as we do consume is dispersed and scattered over a multitude of trivial interests instead of being focused upon some one pursuing aim. We intend to show you how you can lose yourself in your work with an absorbing passion, and how you can at any time make special requisition upon your hidden stores of potential energy and draw new supplies of power that will sweep you on to your goal. More than anything else, it is the ability to do this that lifts the great men of the race above the common run of mortals. It is this that distinguishes genius from mediocrity. The master man transforms his vast stores of reserve or potential energy into circulating or kinetic energy. His work glows with living fire. Yet for every such man there are a multitude of others, equally gifted in some respect, but wanting that mysterious "open sesame" which would discover their hidden mental riches, arouse them from their accustomed inferiority to their best selves, and transform potentiality into accomplishment. So it comes about that most of us are gems that shine but to illuminate the dark unfathomed caves of ocean, flowers born to blush unseen. Take an illustration of the way in which this reserve or potential energy is transformed into circulating or kinetic energy. Suppose that you are a countryman and come to live in a large city. The speed with which we do things, our habits of quick decision, the whirlwind of activities of the busy man in town, appall you. You cannot see how we live through it. A day in the business district fills you with terror. The tumult and danger make it seem like a permanent earthquake. But settle down to work here, and in a year you will have caught the pulse beat. You will vibrate to the city's rhythm, and if only you make good in your work you will enjoy the strain and hurry, you will keep pace with the best of us, and you will get more out of yourself in a day in the city than you ever did in a week on the farm. This change in degree of mental activity does not necessarily mean that you are making more of a success of life. Your activities may be ill-directed, your new-found powers may be misspent and dissipated. But you are mentally more alert, your mental forces have been stimulated by the stirring environment. And mark this particularly. A number of mental pictures will pass across the screen of your consciousness today in the same time that one mental image formerly required. Now you have learned that with every idea catalogued in memory, there is wrapped up and stowed away an associated feeling tone, and an associated impulse to some particular muscular action. Assuming this, you must at once see that here is an explanation of your new-found energy. Your quickened step, your newfound decisiveness of action, your more observant eye, your clear-cut speech instead of the former drawling utterance, your livelier manner, your freshened enthusiasm and enjoyment of life, all of these are but manifestations of a quickened intelligence. They are the working out through the motor paths of mental impulses to muscular action. And these impulses to muscular action come thronging into consciousness because the livelier environment brings about a more rapid reproduction of memory pictures. And here comes a particularly striking fact. One would naturally suppose that the more energy a man consumed and the faster he lived, the more quickly his vitality would be exhausted and the shorter his life would be. As a matter of fact, by the divine beneficence of Providence, your organism is so ordered as to adapt itself within certain wide limits to the demands made upon it. You may call into play all the stored up resources of your being and still not stake everything upon a single throw, for the supply of mental energy is as inexhaustible as the reservoir of all past experience, while the supply of physical energy involved in brain and nerve activity is, like the immortal liver of Prometheus, renewed as fast as depleted. Two sets of facts that have been established by elaborate scientific experiment will convince you of the truth of these propositions. Professor Patrick, of the State University of Iowa, conducted some of these experiments. He caused 3 young men to remain awake for 4 successive days and nights. They were then allowed to go to sleep, the purpose of the experiment being to determine just how much time nature required to recuperate from the long vigil. They were allowed to sleep themselves out, and all woke up thoroughly rested, yet the one who slept the longest slept only 1/3 longer than his customary night's sleep. You have doubtless had the same experience yourself many times. It all goes to show that if we are awake 4 times as long as usual, we do not make up for it by sleeping 4 times as long, but 4 times as soundly as customary. The hard-working mechanic requires no more hours of sleep than the corner loafer, the active man of affairs no more than the dawdler. The time of tissue repair is about the same with all men under all conditions. It is the rate of repair that varies with the demand that has been put upon the body. Again, look at the same subject from the standpoint of food supply. On what you now eat and drink you have a certain average weight. Eat, digest, and assimilate a larger quantity of food, and your weight will increase. This increase will be greatest at the start, and will gradually slow up until you shall have reached the point beyond which you can gain no more. Given the same hygienic conditions that you have been accustomed to, you will maintain yourself at the increased weight on the increased food supply. Now all this involves clearly enough a greatly increased rate of activity on the part of bodily organs of assimilation and repair. It is a situation on all fours with that of the countryman whose rate of brain activity has been stimulated by an increased mental demand. No man will maintain that better, more nourishing, and more liberal food rations, transformed into increased bodily tissue, with a consequent greater weight and greater muscle strength, would result in a loss of vitality or the shortening of a man's life. Pygmies cannot become giants physically or intellectually, but as the puny youth can by systematic exercise broaden his frame and develop his muscle into at least a semblance of an athlete, and can then go through his healthier appetite and his faster rate of repair maintain himself without effort at the new standard, so can the mentally inert call forth their reserves of energy and maintain a higher standard of activity and fruitfulness. Few men live on the plane of their highest efficiency. Few search the recesses of the well springs of power. The lives of most of us are passed among the shallows of the mine without thought of the possibilities that lurk within the deeper pools. This accumulation of potential subconscious reserve energy is a result of the evolution of man and the growing complexity of his life. No man could, if he would, respond to all the impulses to muscular action aroused in him by sense impressions. It would be still less possible for him to respond to every impulse to muscular action awakened from the past with the remembered thought with which it is associated. Desire, interest, attention, and the selective will must pick and choose among these multitudinous tendencies to action. Here, then, is another fact that has immediate bearing upon your ability to carry out any ambition you may have. Your every action is the net result of selection among a number of impulses and inhibitory forces or tendencies. As a general thing, consciousness is made up of a number of conflicting ideas, each with its associated feeling and its impulse to action. Just what you do in any particular case depends upon what mental picture is strongest, is most vivid in consciousness, and thus able to overcome all contrary tendencies. As life becomes more and more complex, the number and variety of our sensory experiences increase correspondingly, and so it comes about that we have untold millions of sensory experiences, carrying with them the impulses to muscular response, none of which, on account of the multiplicity of conflicting ideas, is ever allowed to find release and actually take form in muscular activity. The consequence is that only an exceedingly small proportion of the mental energy that is developed within us is ever actually displayed. The rest is somehow and somewhere locked up behind the inhibitory threshold. It is stored away in subconsciousness with the sensory experiences of the past with which it is associated. Quoting Mr. Waldo P. Warren, "Much of the strength within men is hidden, awaiting an occasion to reveal it." The head of a department in a great manufacturing concern severed his connection with the firm, his work falling upon a young man of 25 years. The young man rose to the occasion and in a very short time was conceded to be the stronger executive of the two. He had been with the concern for several years and was regarded as a bright fellow, but his marked success was a surprise to all who knew him, even to himself. The fact is, the young man had that ability all the time and didn't know it.